The power of ideas. Ideas have real existence. They are among the most powerful forces acting. Ideas, and the clash of ideas. The ideas of this work are such that if we have something in us that is capable of receiving them, they can begin to act upon us. Modern psychology does not teach the difference between certain ideas, nor does it understand the reality of ideas. Ancient and medieval psychology, as P.D. Ouspensky pointed out, understood far better. Certain ideas require long preparation for right contact, including the idea of master, or real I, and real will. First, a definite teaching, a definite knowledge is required and needs to be studied. Every idea is a delicate mechanism liable to act erroneously if it is incorrectly applied, as for example through false personality. The unskilled handling of an idea may result in an explosion or an outburst. Wrong reasoning, formatory understanding, a literal or logical level can destroy ideas or turn them into something dangerous. Some ideas can reach to the depth of our souls and there leave a trace, discoverable again even in early life. However, a wrong trace may be left there too, creating tendencies. This work is to prepare people for the reception of higher and subtler influences or ideas. Its knowledge must become our knowledge if we really want to work. For a very long time, we have to study the work, make effort, think of and nourish ideas with the most genuine parts of ourselves. Then we can become aware of being in contact internally with higher influences. Every day it is necessary to think about identifying and what it is, in what forms it is at work in us, at this very moment. Identifying is not a word, it is a psychic activity, extremely wasteful, continually taking place, and something that the work says must be continually struggled with. We lose force by it, and this represents gumption that fades away is us to nothing. If we knew for certain that there was another and a better world, one that we had seen and experienced at first hand for ourselves, then we would not be drowned out quite as much by outcomes and events on this imperfect planet of ours. If we knew without doubt that we were in a strange and dangerous place, we would be more careful about how we acted out. Would it not be wonderful to know with absolute clarity and certainty like that? Through our knowledge and experience we'd be protected from identifying in the way that we do with everything and everyone. Because our emotional center has in it a center of gravity of will as illustrated, we can see that identifying is unlikely to lead to any contact with real will or master. We are told that we are only familiar with the emotional feeling of being identified with everything and with everyone else. Our emotional center is swamped with identifying. It is not that we identify simply with our negative emotions, but with all such emotions as we possess. By this identifying, which sometimes takes the form of a continual sense of stress and anxiety, the right function of emotional center is prevented, and force is continually lost, a wrong inner chemistry and admixture of elements is set up, hence the incorrect connections are established between centers. Whatever we identify with, we acquiesce or surrender our will to. However, if we possessed real will, if the master of which this work speaks were sitting in the carriage and the driver heard their voice, then obeyed those instructions, we would no longer be under the power of what we identify with. We'd find ourselves under a different power, having nothing to do with identifying. Nothing to do with internal considering, because when we are in this state, we are rendered deaf. We cannot, for instance, hear the work when we are identified. To obey master would be to obey the work. To obey this work would be to possess real will. This work cautions us not to identify, first and foremost, with ourselves. Assume here that we tried, after seeing a little of what this command actually means. Then some small part of ourselves would awaken to the influence of this work. Of course, that is not the emergence of real I. This would merely represent a few small I's forming consensus and agreeing to work together, which is only the beginning of the stage called the formation of deputy steward. Let's further suggest that we begin to see more deeply what is meant by struggling against identifying with ourselves, and the reasons behind it. Then the matter is no longer a question of obeying some ritual that we've witnessed with our external senses, some commandment that we've read, or a truth entering through our day-to-day experiences. But part of something deeper, something better understood and actually felt from within us. At this point we'd begin to perceive the excellence of this work, as it forms an inside connection. Then we find ourselves under finer influences, those from higher in the ray of creation and so more internally perceived. The ray is always revealed to us internally, when it's felt and experienced deeply and we find that we now simply know. This is the development of master and steward. First, the steward is formed, which is deeper insight. It is not external and subjective as in some dogma or command. It understands for itself through knowing. Its state is like that mentioned at the beginning of this commentary. Envisioning a better level of existence and the need to tread carefully on this level. The stage revealing itself as deputy steward does not sense this depth. For deputy steward the work still comes from outside, as something taught, something in notebooks, and to be shared in commentaries, something that we are told to do without experiencing its excellence internally, which is ecstatic revelation or jhana, an overwhelming sense of bliss. If we believe there is nothing else for us and no higher state, no other meanings, no other levels, no other insights and understandings, no new ways of taking our everyday lives, no other kind of people, no levels in the universe save that of this planet Earth, then how can we stop identifying with everything that we see? How and why should we seek to draw the force of identifying into self-remembering? It's been said that to remember oneself we must have a sense of something superior, something other than this, here and now. Self-remembering is an uplifting to another set of influences. However, this is rarely understood, because people are interested only in what they refer to as real life. Nonetheless, look at this life of ours and reflect just a little. The work starts with our mind, not with will. It says certain things. These matters reference our mentality at first, our sense processing. Have you ever attempted to look at life from the ideas of this work? Everyone at their present age must have noticed that life is not what they expected it to be. Have you begun to gradually reflect upon daily life from work ideas? This work is not exactly encouraging about the affairs and goings-on of everyday life and for that matter our imagining of the world, or of ourselves. However, it does suggest that another direction is possible. That is an important thing to begin to grasp. If this work were about being a greater and narcissistic success in life, then it could not be termed work on self, which is about seeking new influences, an unencountered neutralizing force, different from the forces of life. Should we listen to motivational speakers when they recommend becoming more popular, manifesting greater wealth, gaining more power and becoming an influencer of others? This work does not offer that direction and is instead about alternative living. Some understand the strange direction of this work from the onset, some gradually begin to grasp it, and some never understand what on earth the whole thing is all about, however hang on for some insincere misconceived advantage. The idea of new influences and of coming into contact with them is the center of this work. If there were none, then the work would be about nothing and would be utter nonsense. However, this work is actually about something real, because higher influences do exist and contact with them is dependent upon our willingness to undergo inner change, not imitated change, not pretending or playing along in the hope of material gain. This smells different and has a distinct flavor to it. It is impossible to deceive the work once we eventually become sensitive to psychological bad odors. This is not something that anyone particularly enjoys becoming aware of. In the function of real will, a great deal depends upon realizing oneself and observing what generates any sort of momentary will. Let's say that we want to have will, in some real sense, and suppose that we know nothing as yet of ourselves. In this case it will be own will or self-will, which is some form of having our own way towards life or other people. We cannot begin to have real will as long as things move in this direction. Having more power, more possessions, more this and more that. That is not the direction of real will, and it cannot work in this context, for real will knows nothing of the external world. That is the secret to it. It comes from the upper triangle, which is simply a point in the lower. Real will is from the upper part of the diagram of master, steward, deputy steward, and the many eyes that congregate to form magnetic center. It's about master and steward, and so about something else entirely. It is not about smoking or sleeping, exercise, or even about another person, however dearly they might be loved. Real will is about this work and not about things down on the level of the moon or our planet Earth, things and people perceived through our five senses, at level 96 or level 192. When ideas of this work and all of its significance, historically speaking, enter into an individual and they begin to touch their emotional understanding, they are more likely to begin to feel traces of real I, than someone who takes the work externally, as something to listen to and to try to do because they are quite simply instructed to do so, through the practice of dogma and ritual. In the latter case there cannot be real will because real will lies deeply, and not on the surface. That is stigmata, the body and blood, not some building or edifice, some institution and its followers. When we think deeply, we move inward toward the emotional and intellectual division of centers. Whenever we move inward, we find that meaning increases because it is moving upward in the sense of the ray. The density of vibrations increases when passing up the ray. Where there was one, there are now a million. Real will cannot impinge upon such crude meaning as we ordinarily live by, nor can it be negative in the sense of basically not doing anything. Where we saw one thing previously, we begin, through self-observation, with inner sincerity and by reflection, to see 100 new meanings. Where we thought we knew, we see that we actually did not. What is experience? Is it not realizing that we do not know, not negatively but because we see so much more than we did before? Which seems at first glance to be a loss, but it's not actually a loss. Because internally we feel a little loosened up, unbound and freer, so nothing could be better. How else can anything new enter for us, and how could real I enter when we are tightly bound up by our own narrow ideas which rapidly form a sepulchre for the undead?